The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Leatherneck as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her combat gear one final time. At 28 years old, she had already served 3 tours in Afghanistan, but today felt different. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders as she prepared to lead her squad on what intelligence suggested would be a routine patrol through the nearby village of Karabad. Maria had earned the respect of every Marine under her command through sheer determination and unwavering courage. Born in a small town in Texas to immigrant parents who worked double shifts to make ends meet, she understood the value of hard work and sacrifice. Her father, a construction worker with calloused hands and an endless supply of wisdom, had always told her that true strength wasn't about never falling down, it was about getting back up every single time. The morning briefing had been standard protocol. Colonel Harrison, a seasoned officer with silver hair and sharp eyes, outlined the mission parameters with military precision. Intelligence reports indicated potential insurgent activity in the village, but recent weeks had been relatively quiet. The local population seemed cooperative, and the Afghan National Army had established good relationships with the tribal leaders. Remember, this is hearts and minds, Colonel Harrison emphasized, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in the Corps. We're there to help, not to intimidate. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your team has built excellent rapport with the villagers. Keep that momentum going. Maria nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and pressure that came with leadership. Her squad consisted of 12 Marines, each handpicked for their skills and temperament. There was Corporal Jackson, a quick-witted communications specialist from Detroit who could fix any radio equipment with spare parts and determination. Private First Class Thompson, barely 19 but already proving himself as one of the best marksmen in the company. Sergeant Williams, a veteran of Iraq who served as her second-in-command and had saved her life more than once with his tactical expertise. As they loaded into the armored vehicles, Maria caught sight of a letter she'd received from home the previous day. Her younger sister Carmen was graduating from college next month, the first in their family to earn a degree. The pride in her mother's voice during their last video call still echoed in her mind. Misha, you're making a difference over there. Her mother had said, tears glistening in her dark eyes. But don't forget to come home to us. The convoy rolled through the checkpoint at 0800 hours, dust clouds trailing behind the vehicles as they navigated the rough terrain. The landscape was harsh, but beautiful in its own way, rocky mountains rising in the distance, their peaks catching the early morning light. Maria had learned to appreciate these moments of relative peace during transport, knowing that situations could change rapidly in this environment. 20 minutes into the journey, their interpreter, Hamid, pointed toward a cluster of mud brick buildings ahead. Hamid was a local man in his 50s who had been working with American forces for over a year. He had a gentle manner and spoke excellent English, having studied at Kabul University before the conflicts began. His knowledge of local customs and language had proven invaluable during previous missions. Staff Sergeant, the village elder wants to show you the new well, Hamid explained, his weathered face creasing into a slight smile. The one your engineers helped them dig last month. He says the children have been getting clean water for the first time in years. Maria felt a surge of satisfaction. These were the victories that mattered, not just military objectives, but real improvements in people's lives. The well project had been her initiative, convincing the higher-ups that investing in infrastructure would build more goodwill than any weapons cache they might discover. The vehicles came to a stop at the village outskirts, and the Marines began their standard dismount procedures. Maria stepped onto the sandy ground, immediately feeling the heat radiating up through her boots. The village seemed peaceful, children playing in the dusty streets, women carrying water jugs, elderly men sitting in the shade of an ancient olive tree. As they walked toward the village center, Maria noticed something that made her pause. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, was sitting alone by a crumbling wall. The child's clothes were tattered, and she seemed to be favoring one leg. Without hesitation, Maria approached, crouching down to the girl's level. Hamid, can you ask her what's wrong? Maria requested, her voice gentle. The conversation that followed revealed that the girl had injured her leg several days ago and hadn't received proper medical attention. Maria immediately called for their medic, Petty Officer Martinez, who examined the child with professional care. It wasn't serious, a minor infection that could be easily treated with antibiotics, but it reminded Maria why they were there. While Martinez treated the girl, the village elder approached. He was a dignified man named Malik, with a long gray beard and eyes that held decades of wisdom and hardship. Through Hamid's translation, he expressed his gratitude for the Americans' continued assistance and invited Maria to see not just the well, but also a small school they had managed to reopen with supplies the Marines had provided. The tour of the village took nearly 2 hours. Maria met teachers who were educating children for the first time in years, saw farmers who were growing crops with improved irrigation techniques, and witnessed a community slowly rebuilding itself from the devastation of war. Each interaction reinforced her belief that their mission was making a real difference. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature continued to climb. Maria had been hydrating regularly, but the combination of the heat, her heavy gear, and the emotional weight of the day was beginning to take its toll. She felt a slight dizziness creeping in but pushed it aside, focusing on the mission at hand. The village elder was in the middle of explaining their plans for expanding the school when Maria noticed dark spots beginning to cloud her vision. The voices around her seemed to be coming from a great distance, and she felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue washing over her like a tide. "Staff Sergeant, you okay?" Sergeant Williams' voice cut through the haze, but it sounded muffled and far away. Maria tried to respond, to maintain her composure and leadership presence, but her body had other plans. The last thing she remembered was the concerned look on Hamid's face as her knees buckled and everything went black. The collapse happened so quickly that it took several seconds for everyone to process what had occurred. One moment, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was standing tall, listening intently to the village elder's words. The next, she was unconscious on the ground, her weapon secured, but her body completely limp. Sergeant Williams immediately took charge, barking orders with the precision of a seasoned Marine. "Martinez! Get over here now! Thompson, establish a perimeter! Jackson, radio for immediate medevac." The villagers, rather than panicking or taking advantage of the situation, gathered around with genuine concern. The village elder, Malik, began speaking in rapid Pashto to Hamid, clearly distressed about their guest's condition. As Petty Officer Martinez began his assessment, checking Maria's vital signs and trying to determine the cause of her collapse, something extraordinary began to happen throughout the village and back at the base. Word of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's collapse spread through the base communications network faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within minutes of Corporal Jackson's initial radio call, every Marine in the company knew that their respected leader was down. But what happened next would become the stuff of military legend. Petty Officer Martinez worked quickly and efficiently, his medical training taking over as he assessed Maria's condition. Her pulse was rapid, but strong. Her breathing, shallow, but steady. The oppressive heat, combined with dehydration and exhaustion, had overwhelmed her system. It was serious, but treatable with immediate medical intervention. "She's stable, but we need to get her cooled down and hydrated fast," Martinez reported to Sergeant Williams. "This heat exhaustion could turn into heat stroke if we don't act quickly." Williams nodded grimly, coordinating the medevac request while maintaining security protocols. But as he spoke into his radio, he noticed something happening that made him pause mid-sentence. The villagers weren't scattering or taking cover as they usually did when military situations arose. Instead, they were gathering closer, their faces etched with genuine concern. The village elder, Malik, approached Williams with tears in his weathered eyes. Through Hamid's translation, his words were simple but powerful. "She came to help our children. Now, we help her." Without being asked, the villagers began bringing whatever they could to assist. Women appeared with clean cloths and cool water from the new well Maria had helped them build. Men carried wooden boards to create shade structures. Children, including the little girl Maria had helped earlier that day, sat quietly nearby, their young faces serious with worry. Back at Camp Leatherneck, Colonel Harrison received the situation report with the kind of concern reserved for family members. He had watched Staff Sergeant Rodriguez develop into one of his finest non-commissioned officers over the past 18 months. Her dedication to both her Marines and the Afghan people had earned her a reputation that extended far beyond their immediate unit. "Sir," came the voice of Master Sergeant Peterson over the radio. "The entire company is requesting permission to provide assistance." Harrison paused, understanding the implications. In military protocol, such requests were unusual. But Maria Rodriguez wasn't just any Marine. She had touched the lives of hundreds of servicemen and women through her leadership, courage, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. "Denied," Harrison replied, though his heart wasn't in the refusal. "We can't risk additional personnel for a single medical evacuation." But something was already happening that Harrison couldn't control through radio commands or military regulations. Marines throughout the base had begun gathering in the central courtyard, not through any official order, but through an unspoken understanding that one of their own needed their support. Private First Class Anderson was among the first to arrive at the courtyard. Maria had been his squad leader during his first deployment, and she had quite literally saved his life during an IED attack 6 months earlier, when shrapnel had torn through his leg and panic had set in. It was Maria's calm voice and steady hands that had kept him conscious until the medics arrived. "She pulled me out of that wreckage when I couldn't move," Anderson told the growing crowd of Marines. Said she wasn't leaving any of her Marines behind, ever. Similar stories began emerging as more service members gathered. Sergeant Foster recounted how Maria had spent her own leave time helping him navigate a difficult family situation back home, making calls and coordinating support when his wife had been hospitalized. Lance Corporal Hayes described how she had mentored him through the challenges of military life when he was struggling with homesickness and doubts about his service. The helicopter carrying the medical evacuation team was still 30 minutes out when reports came in that made Colonel Harrison realize something unprecedented was occurring. Marines from other companies had begun arriving at the courtyard, having heard about the situation through the efficient grapevine that exists in any military installation. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Davis, his voice carrying a note of awe, "we've got Marines from Alpha Company, Bravo Company, and even some Navy personnel gathering outside. They're not causing any disruption, but they're asking for updates on Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's condition." Harrison made his way to the window of his office and looked down at the courtyard. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Nearly 200 Marines and other service members had gathered in neat formation, not because they had been ordered to, but because they chose to be there. They stood in perfect silence, their faces reflecting the kind of respect and solidarity that defines the military family. Meanwhile, in the village, Maria's condition was stabilizing under Martinez's care and the unexpected assistance from the local population. The villagers had created an impromptu field hospital, complete with shade, ventilation, and a steady supply of clean water. The village women, many of whom were mothers themselves, took turns fanning her with palm fronds and monitoring her comfort. As Maria slowly regained consciousness, the first face she saw was that of the little girl she had helped earlier. The child was holding a small flower she had picked from somewhere in the village, offering it with a shy smile despite the language barrier between them. "Welcome back, Staff Sergeant," Martinez said with evident relief. "You gave us quite a scare there." Maria tried to sit up, but Martinez gently but firmly kept her lying down. "Easy there. You need to take it slow. Heat exhaustion is nothing to mess around with." As her awareness returned, Maria became conscious of the crowd surrounding her. But instead of the chaos she might have expected, there was an atmosphere of profound calm and mutual support. Afghan villagers and American Marines working together, united in their concern for her well-being. Sergeant Williams approached with his radio in hand. "Staff Sergeant, the base is asking for a status update, but I think you should know there's something happening back home that you need to hear about." Through the crackling radio connection, Maria could hear voices in the background. Multiple voices. Hundreds of them, creating a low murmur of conversation and concern. Williams explained what was occurring at the base, how Marines from across the installation had gathered spontaneously, creating an impromptu vigil of sorts. "They're not going anywhere until they know you're okay," Williams told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single one of them has a story about how you've helped them or someone they know." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness or embarrassment. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and recognition of the bonds that connected them all. She had joined the Marines to serve her country and make a difference in the world. But she was learning that sometimes the greatest impact comes from the simple act of caring about the people around you. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance announced the arrival of the medevac team, but Maria was already feeling stronger. The combination of medical treatment, the cooling efforts of the villagers, and the emotional support flowing from both the local population and her fellow Marines had worked better than any single medical intervention. As the helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and noise, Maria realized that this moment lying in the shade provided by Afghan villagers, while knowing that hundreds of Marines were standing in solidarity back at base, represented everything she had hoped the military could be. It was proof that service wasn't just about individual heroism or tactical victories. It was about building connections that transcended cultural boundaries and creating communities strong enough to support each other through any challenge. The medevac team quickly but carefully loaded Maria onto a stretcher, preparing for the short flight back to the base medical facility. As they lifted off, she caught a final glimpse of the village below. The residents had gathered to wave farewell, their faces reflecting the same mixture of relief and affection that she felt toward them. But the most powerful moment was still ahead, waiting for her at Camp Leatherneck, where 500 Marines would demonstrate what honor, respect, and brotherhood truly meant. The helicopter touched down at Camp Leatherneck's medical landing zone with the precision that came from countless similar missions. But as the rotors began to slow and the dust settled, it became clear that this was no ordinary medical evacuation. The landing zone, typically staffed by a handful of medical personnel and security guards, was surrounded by an unprecedented gathering. 500 Marines stood in perfect formation around the perimeter, their uniforms crisp, despite the desert heat, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and profound respect. They had been gathering for over an hour, not through any official command, but through the kind of spontaneous organization that happens when people are united by genuine care and shared values. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the formation, having made the decision to join his Marines rather than observe from his office. As a career military officer, he had witnessed many acts of courage and brotherhood, but nothing quite like what was unfolding before him. This wasn't about military protocol or ceremonial tradition, it was about family. As the medical team carefully transferred Maria from the helicopter to a waiting gurney, she caught her first glimpse of the assembled Marines. The sight took her breath away more effectively than any heat exhaustion could have. Row after row of her fellow service members, standing in silent solidarity, their attention focused entirely on her well-being. Dr. Sarah Chen, the base medical officer, quickly took charge of Maria's care, but even she paused when she saw the gathering. "I've been practicing military medicine for 15 years, she whispered to her assistant, "and I've never seen anything like this." As they wheeled Maria toward the medical facility, something extraordinary happened. Without any verbal command or signal, the assembled Marines began to move, not breaking formation, but turning as one unit to face her direction. The silence was profound and powerful, broken only by the soft sound of hundreds of boots shifting in unison on the sandy ground. Master Sergeant Peterson, a 20-year veteran who had served in 3 different conflicts, stepped forward as the gurney passed. His weathered face, usually set in the stern expression that came with his rank and responsibilities, was softened with emotion. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, in a voice that carried clearly across the landing zone, "you have served with distinction and honor." The simple words seemed to unlock something in the assembled crowd. One by one, Marines began stepping forward, not breaking ranks, but making their presence known. Some nodded respectfully. Others offered brief words of encouragement. Many simply stood taller, their bearing reflecting the pride they felt in their shared service. Inside the medical facility, Dr. Chen conducted a thorough examination while the gathering outside continued to grow. Word had spread beyond the base, and reports were coming in of similar gatherings at other installations where Marines who had served with Maria were stationed. Social media posts from family members and friends were beginning to circulate, sharing stories of her dedication and character. Physically, you're going to be fine, Dr. Chen assured Maria as she reviewed the test results. Heat exhaustion is serious, but you responded well to treatment. We'll keep you here for observation for a few hours, but I expect a full recovery. Maria nodded her gratitude, but her attention kept drifting to the window, where she could see the edges of the crowd still gathered outside. Doctor, why are they all still out there? Shouldn't they return to their duties? Dr. Chen smiled, understanding the question behind the question. Staff Sergeant, in all my years of military medicine, I've learned that some things can't be regulated or commanded. Respect has to be earned. And what's happening out there is the result of months and years of earning that respect through your actions and character. As the afternoon progressed, the gathering began to take on an almost ceremonial quality. Marines who had been on duty rotations came to pay their respects before returning to their posts. Others brought folding chairs for those who had been standing for hours. Someone organized a rotation system so that everyone could participate while still maintaining the base's operational requirements. Stories began circulating through the crowd, shared memories, and experiences that painted a picture of why Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had earned such devotion. Lance Corporal Williams told anyone who would listen about the time Maria had spent her entire leave helping him prepare for the birth of his first child, even driving his wife to doctor's appointments when he was deployed. Sergeant Major Rodriguez, no relation, despite sharing a last name, recounted how Maria had volunteered to lead additional patrols when his unit was short-handed, never complaining about the extra duty or dangerous assignments. She never asked what was in it for her, he told the group gathered around him. She just asked what needed to be done. The base chaplain, Father O'Sullivan, moved through the crowd offering support and listening to the stories being shared. What struck him most was the diversity of the people who had been touched by Maria's service. Marines from different companies, Navy personnel, civilian contractors, and even some Afghan interpreters who had worked with her unit. She treated everyone with the same respect, explained Hamid, the interpreter who had been with Maria during her collapse. He had requested permission to come to the base to check on her condition. American, Afghan, it didn't matter. She saw people as people. First, as evening approached, Colonel Harrison made the decision to address the gathering. It was unusual for a commanding officer to speak to such an informal assembly, but the circumstances were far from ordinary. He took a position where everyone could see him, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air. Marines, he began, using the traditional address that encompassed all branches of service represented in the crowd. What we have witnessed today goes to the very heart of what it means to serve. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez collapsed not from weakness, but from the exhaustion that comes from giving everything to the mission and to the people around her. He paused, looking across the faces of the assembled service members. But what happened next? Your spontaneous gathering, your concern for a fellow Marine, your willingness to stand here for hours without being ordered to do so. This represents the very best of our military traditions. You have honored not just Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, but the uniform that all of you wear. As if by pre-arranged signal, though none had been given, the entire gathering came to attention. 500 Marines, sailors, and support personnel stood as one, their bearing reflecting years of training and discipline, but their motivation coming from something much deeper than military protocol. Inside the medical facility, Maria could hear Colonel Harrison's voice through the window, and she finally understood the true magnitude of what was happening outside. These weren't just her fellow service members paying a courtesy visit to an injured colleague. This was a family, a military family, demonstrating the bonds that made their shared sacrifice meaningful. Dr. Chen helped Maria to the window, where she could see the full scope of the gathering. The sight was overwhelming hundreds of people who had chosen to spend their off-duty time standing in respect for her service and recovery. Many were people she had worked with directly, but others were Marines she had never met who had heard about her character and dedication through the stories shared throughout the base. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the base, Colonel Harrison gave the command that officially ended the gathering. "Dismissed," he said simply, though his voice carried notes of pride and emotion. But even as the formation began to break up, individuals continued to approach the medical facility. Some left small tokens, challenge coins, handwritten notes, flowers picked from the base gardens. Others simply stood for a moment outside the window, offering a salute or a wave that transcended military rank and spoke to the human connections that made their service meaningful. That evening, as Maria lay in the medical facility recovering from her heat exhaustion, she received a video call from her family back in Texas. Her mother, father, and sister had heard about the incident through military channels. But what they had also heard were the stories of the gathering, the respect shown, and the way an entire military community had rallied around their daughter and sister. "Mija," her mother said through tears of pride, "your father and I always knew you were special. But today, the whole world can see what we've always seen." Maria's recovery was swift and complete. Within 48 hours, she was cleared for duty and back with her squad. But the events of that day had created something that would last far longer than any medical treatment. The story spread throughout military circles, becoming a reminder of what service really meant and how individual actions could create ripple effects that touched hundreds of lives. Months later, when Maria was awarded a commendation for her service in Afghanistan, the citation mentioned not just her tactical skills and leadership ability, but her dedication to building bridges between cultures and her commitment to seeing the humanity in every person she encountered. The 500 Marines who had stood in respect for her courage had done more than honor one person. They had demonstrated the values that made their service meaningful and created a moment that would inspire others for years to come. The village well that Maria had helped build continued to provide clean water for the families of Karabad. The school she had supported graduated its first class of students the following year, and the bonds between the American Marines and the local population, strengthened by moments of genuine human connection, continued to make a difference in ways both large and small. But perhaps most importantly, the story of that day became a reminder to everyone who heard it that true courage isn't just about facing enemy fire or completing dangerous missions. Sometimes, the greatest courage is shown in the simple act of caring about others, building relationships across cultural divides, and creating communities where people support each other through any challenge. The 500 Marines who stood in respect for Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's courage had witnessed something profound that day, not just the recovery of a fellow service member, but a demonstration of the values that made their shared sacrifice meaningful. They had seen proof that individual actions, guided by compassion and dedication, could create bonds strong enough to unite people across any divide.